We as a nation have been gripped, I think, in this collective hysteria that there is no alternative to the drastic cuts that this coalition government are enacting. I, as an economist by background, was really inspired by Ed's alternative message, and I joined the Labour Party and his campaign for leadership of the party because of that inspiration. And I hope many of you today will feel the same inspiration that I felt, so it gives me a huge pleasure to introduce you to Ed Balls. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette, for that introduction, and thank you very much indeed to Bloomberg for giving me the opportunity this morning to respond from the same platform to the rather bullish speech we had from George Osborne just 10 days ago. That speech was the clearest articulation of the Cameron-Clegg coalition strategy for government. And the Chancellor again declared that this was the only possible credible economic strategy for the future, and he dismissed anyone who doubts that fiscal deflation on this scale and at this delicate stage of the economic recovery is the right approach. Everything he's doing now is designed to suck money out of the economy, to cut public investment, while his tax rises and benefit cuts will directly hit households at the worst possible time. It is the exact reversal of the policy which allowed Britain to weather the financial storm in recent years. George Osborne was fond of saying, wrongly, that the Labour government had failed to fix the roof when the sun was shining. What he is doing now is the equivalent of ripping out the foundations of the house as the hurricane starts to build around. And that must be a mistake, and we must argue against that. It seems incredible to me that such fundamental, far-reaching economic decisions are being taken by the coalition government with so little debate and, let's be clear, with no mandate for the British people. We face fundamental questions now. Is it right to be cutting billions of pounds this year from the public sector and taking billions of pounds out of family budgets? What will this mean for growth and jobs? Ultimately, what will that mean for the deficit? But these questions are being almost ignored. And when I've been on TV recently, interviewers look aghast when I say that cutting public spending this year or pre-announcing a rise in VAT is economically foolish. But what would you cut instead? They always ask. So strong and broad is this consensus that a special name has been given to those who take a different view. They're called deficit deniers. And some in our own Labour Party believe that our very credibility as a party depends on hitching ourselves to that consensus view. I'm not one of them. And I do believe on the economy, on public services, on the welfare state, we face a choice. And that's why I want today to respond to the speech from George Osborne of 10 days ago, to argue that it was fundamentally flawed, that it was wrong in its analysis of the past, that it's reckless in its diagnosis of the current situation, and it's dangerous in its prescription for the future. I want to say my fear is that the coalition government is set to repeat the mistakes of history, and that George Osborne's declaration 10 days ago that he was cautiously optimistic may go down alongside Norman Lamont's famous singing in the bath phrase, but also that it's not too late to change course. And so therefore today I will set out the building blocks of an alternative economic strategy rooted in our history and analysis, as well as the values and principles that unite our country. So the first lesson I draw from history is to be wary of any British economic policymaker or media commentator who tells you that there is no alternative, something has to be done because the markets demand it. Adopting the consensus view may be the easy and safe thing to do, but it doesn't make you right, and in the long term, it doesn't make you credible either. But there's a second lesson too, which is also very pertinent. It isn't enough to be right if you don't win the argument. That has been Labour's current predicament. Public support for the coalition actions to cut the deficit is there and real. Of course, while it's one thing for the public to support deficit reduction when they're told it's coming from waste in public spending, it's quite another thing when the cuts mean local school buildings being cancelled or play facilities cancelled too, as Michael Gove has found out in recent weeks and months. Labour does need a credible and medium-term plan to reduce the deficit and reduce our levels of national debt, but only once government growth is fully secured and over a markedly longer period than George Osborne is currently planning. We do need to do more to raise taxes fairly. I've argued for starting the top rate of tax at 100,000, not 150, for reversing the cancelled part of the national insurance rise. I support an international transactions tax. I think David Miliband is right to propose a new wealth tax on the largest estates. And we will need also to set out tough spending decisions in some areas, but by far the biggest influence on deficit reduction and the balance between taxation and spending will be economic growth, the number of people in jobs, and therefore the number of taxpayers paying their taxes and making a contribution to getting the deficit down. Finally, let me say, whatever our competing visions for the economy, growth and deficit reduction, there is also a wider and more fundamental issue at stake, and that is fairness. David Cameron, George Osborne, actually Nick Clegg too, I believe are using their crusade to cut the deficit to make a wider ideological argument. I think David Cameron has a narrow view of the role of the state, that it essentially stifles society and economic progress and needs to be moved out of the way. I have a wider view of the state, a coming together of communities through democracy to support people, to intervene where markets fail, to actively promote economic prosperity and opportunity, which recognises that widely unequal societies are unfair and divisive and relies on active government and a modern welfare state to deliver fair chances for all. I believe, far from thinking that electoral success for Labour is based on shedding or hiding our values, I believe we should champion those values now, and by comparison, we must expose the coalition's plans as heartless and wrong-headed. I believe that is the challenge for Labour's next leader. And I thank you for coming today.
What I'm concerned about is that a lot of public sector contracts being reined in and cut, and that's having an impact on the number of jobs available in the private sector. So what do you say to those companies?
The danger is you combine a public sector retrenchment, which we're now beginning in earnest, mistakenly, with a private sector retrenchment as well, and that would be particularly damaging and destabilising.
Are you convinced that what you're arguing is enough to stimulate the growth we need? And if not, what more could be done?
Well, as I said, first of all, the economic evidence is that the economy was much stronger at the end of last year and the first part of this year than we realised at the time. So actually, we got the economy right. And I don't think we managed to win that argument as decisively as we should have done.
I thought the speech was spot on. I mean, and today's figures that have come out, I think he's absolutely right, have vindicated clearly the work that was going on.
It was very interesting. It's like really starting to articulate the policy that we need. So it's really interesting to hear what Ed's got to say. Very interesting for the leadership election and as a Labour Party in opposition.
You've seen the growth figures of today. There was the higher growth when the Labour government was in, and now sort of like there's hard proof coming to back up the argument that Ed has been making all along on the economy.
I think it's sort of proved that Ed is not only the best candidate in terms of the leadership election to sort of fight the Tories, but also to bring the Labour Party back. And Ed's sort of proven the point that thanks to the Labour Party there has been some growth out of what's just happened.